Hey, everybody. Welcome to another Hot Routes here on Purple Insider. Matthew Coller and Manny Hill back with you. Manny, I think we've got a lot to talk about. In fact, I had to stop you from ranting so we could actually start the show
Yeah.
going off about the Minnesota Vikings starting their season 0-3. So we've got a lot of Vikings to talk about, some other things around the league. I want to discuss 70 points being put up by the Miami Dolphins and what's going on in a few other cities after yesterday's results, which was full peak NFL season. So hopefully you are watching football tonight along with listening to us and we can have a good time. And of course, comments, questions, and everything else always welcome. But we've got to start, Manny. I mean, I don't know what week you expected Kirk Cousins trade rumors to start to emerge. I think we saw a lot of comments and questions in the offseason that were asking us, hey, you think if this started out really badly, they could consider trading Kirk? And my answer was always, I think there's a certain number that does lead to that discussion. I don't think that 0-3 is that number, but I do think 0-4 is that number. And I think 1-5 is probably also that number, regardless of what argument you could make about the soft part of the schedule in the middle. But what's interesting to me about the Jets being in this discussion is the Jets need him yesterday. They don't, I mean, if they trade for him 3 weeks from now, their season is probably too far gone to be able to save. And what are they going to give up to try to get Kirk Cousins? So are you buying that there is anything to rumors that the New York Jets are going to reach out to the Minnesota Vikings? Adam Schefter said it made sense, but didn't say that he's heard anything that it's happening. But do you think that it is realistic and that it's something the Vikings should consider?
I I think it's always a possibility, but it seems to me with all of the talk and the speculation about it, particularly by the national media, it feels a lot more like wishful thinking versus like, hey, the Jets might actually have conversations with them. Because I just look at the entire situation and I think of how logistically, how is it even possible? Like how can they even, how is it even feasible? Do the Jets have the cap space to absorb Kirk's contract? Can the with the Vikings then if they don't, with the Vikings then say, okay, we'll continue to pay his salary the rest of the season? Can they even do that? Like, I don't know. Like it just doesn't really seem very feasible. And it feels a lot like, the national talk show host, Rich Eisen, Jets fan, Greeny, Jets fan. Like they're all just kind of like wishing for this to happen because they're so desperate for their team to make something happen and keep the season alive with the loss of Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, no, I think that you're right. I mean, for one, the entertainment value, we all talked about the Jets for an entire offseason and how good their roster was and how they were supposed to be in the mix. And yet then calamity struck right away. So everyone's looking for answers. But the other part of it is Zach Wilson has not just been bad. Zach Wilson has looked like if you just grabbed some former D1 quarterback off the street and said, hey, we got nobody to play today, like they do with the hockey goalies, right? If goalies get hurt, then somebody comes down from the press box and has to play in the game, which has actually happened before. That's been probably, I mean, remember when Ben DiNucci started a game a few years ago for the Dallas Cowboys? He was better than Zach Wilson has looked. It's been so putrid. And I think when you look at all the talent they have, Quinnen Williams, Garrett Wilson, that I think everyone's imagining this world where they could trade for someone who's really good and then put him in there and then Jets are back. And I think that makes a lot of logical sense. It also makes sense for the outside world to say, look, you guys are 0-3 and the history on 0-3 is very clear. You ain't making it. I mean, not unless there's some sort of miracle. There's like a 2% chance, which, there's always a chance. But at the same time, I mean, yeah, it adds up, right? Like these two teams where you have one team that could turn their season around with the win in week one, it now becomes more possible if Kirk was there. But as you mentioned, the logistics are difficult. What are you trading him for? How are you trading him? What is he actually even, what is he worth? Like, I can't remember anything like this except for Carson Palmer going to the Raiders, and that was kind of a disaster. The Vikings had to give up a first-round pick to get Sam Bradford. I don't think they're doing that. Multiple people in the comments have mentioned the no trade clause, which Kirk Cousins has to accept. This is a guy who I believe wants to be in the same place as his family. Is he moving his family to New York? I mean, there's like a lot of things that go into something like this to have to happen. And the Vikings have to believe it's completely over. And the ownership has to accept that it's completely over and be okay with playing like Nick Mullins or Jaron Hall and having a rough ride. And Justin Jefferson also has to play into this discussion as well with his upcoming contract negotiations. So there's just a lot of things working against it, even though I think if you were playing on Madden and your quarterback got hurt, they would trade you Kirk Cousins for a first round pick or whatever. But I do think, Manny, if they go to 0-4, I mean, you got to start making the phone calls and seeing what anybody wants for anything. Do you want Harrison Smith? Do you want Danielle Hunter? Do you want Jordan Hicks, who I thought played pretty well yesterday? I mean, Harrison Phillips, anything if they get to 0-4, including Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, because if you go to 0-4, you lose to Carolina on Sunday. Now you got, you're staring the world champions right in the face coming in the week after the Kansas City Chiefs coming to US Bank Stadium the following week. Then you're at Chicago, and then you got the Niners, you're at the Packers, Atlanta. Atlanta looks, I know they lost yesterday to Detroit, but Atlanta, I think with the start that they've gotten off to, you can't sleep on that game either. I mean, if you're 0-4 with that schedule ahead after that, it's going to be really tough to get yourself back into it, because now you're looking at, it's probably going to take 10 wins to win this division, maybe 9, but probably 10. And if you're 0-4, that means you got to go 10-3 the rest of the way to win this division. That looks like a very, very, very tall order if you can't come away with a victory at Carolina on Sunday.
Right. And even if you won every single game, that we could make an argument that you have a better team than, your Denver, your Las Vegas, whoever else. Have we ever known the Minnesota Vikings to not lose a game that they should win? I mean, they've already done it once so far this year. I would never have predicted that they would have lost the way they did to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So one of those teams is probably going to upset them. And then you get to the end of the season and you're facing Detroit twice. And Detroit, as long as they're healthy, as a better team than the Vikings from what we've seen so far this year. The other part of it, though, is, if they win this week, I think this conversation is pretty much off the table, because they very likely will win in Chicago. And then they're going to start, hoping that they can bring it together. And when there's a really, ironic about the point differential, Manny, because last year we cited the point differential over and over to say, I think this team's strength is probably way less than their record. And at the end of the day, they looked more like a 9-8 team in point differential than they did. Their actual record was 13. And this year, their point differential is better than Washington, and Washington's 2-1 and they're 0-3. And it's like, oh, here we go again. Now it's going to be the opposite with the point differential. But I think this week is a big swing for the Kirk Cousins situation. And yeah, I guess one thing I do wonder about is, let's say though, because I think all scenarios are on the table. Let's say that Kirk Cousins gets the season turned around, starting in Carolina, pulls off one upset between Kansas City or San Francisco. I mean, any team can beat any team. Arizona won this week against Dallas. You pull off an upset. Wouldn't that be just the most classic Cousins era Vikings thing to do? Is that at some point they're like 6-6. And I just had this come to mind today of, if he turns it around and they get to 9-8 and just miss the playoffs, but Cousins goes for 5,000 yards, 37 touchdowns, 8 interceptions or less, are they going to re-sign him and talk about how they just need one defensive lineman?
Sure sounds like it, doesn't it? I mean, you can never put it past, I think, this organization, even though they're under different leadership in the front office than Rick Spielman. But it certainly was something that Rick Spielman would do, right? I mean, it's something that we saw him do a couple of times. It kind of reminds me of, you go back to the COVID year, 2020, where they got off to that 1-5 start, and everybody was like, "Okay, this is falling apart. Let's move Kirk while you can. You know, the contract is up. Let's just move on from him and start things over." And then they go into Green Bay, and Dalvin Cook runs all over the Packers defense, and they win a game at Lambeau. And then they start turning things around, and then they get in a position where they're going into Tampa Bay, and they, maybe have a shot. They're on the outside looking in for the playoffs, but then, hey, if they can beat Tampa Bay, then they're right there in the mix. And then they lose to the Bucks, and at that point, the season is essentially over. So they just tease you enough. If they find a way to split those Kansas City and San Francisco games, and then maybe you go into Green Bay and win, and you sneak one away in Atlanta. Now you're sitting at maybe 4-5 or something like that, and you're right there. And then the conversation starts happening of like, okay, well, they just make this move. They re-sign Kirk, restructure him, get him one more year, and just get this guy. And then they use their draft pick on a guy that will fill an immediate need, instead of just getting a guy that can help bigger picture long term. Uh, that that would frustrate me, just because we've seen it so many times, and every time they do it, it's just like, no, that's not, no, no. I just, Caller, like we've talked about a million times, I just, watching yesterday's game play out, it's just over. And I think it's just time to move on. I don't want to mess around with this stuff anymore. We've seen it now for 5+ seasons, the same thing over and over and over. And I just think it's time to move on and pivot and go in a different direction, because eventually you're going to have to do that anyway. Kirk's not going to play forever. They're going to have to make that decision to transition to a new quarterback at some point. And now just seems like a better time than ever before to get that done.
No, I totally agree, and that's why the trade conversation comes up when your odds to make the playoffs are so low, is because it works on many levels. Not only trying to get a trade or an asset in the draft that you're trading for, but also to be in a position to draft a quarterback for next year. But I don't think it's late enough in the game for everybody to agree on the nuclear option. Even though I think we could all say, look, the best case scenario with the way this plays out with the weaknesses on this team is probably that you go 9-8, and then you got a 50% chance to make the playoffs, but you could end up just like the Lions basically in the best case scenario. That means you played awesome the whole rest of the year. You had good breaks, you stayed healthy, all those things for the rest of the year. You played great to get a 50% chance. And that, to me, that math already doesn't add up. But I think with just convincing the ownership that it's really over, you need to be sitting at basically 1-5. And the question is, would the Jets already be too far gone at that point? If they're also 1-5, are they going to be like, oh, yeah, here's a whatever pick for Kirk Cousins? Like, Delton asks here, what round do you think that Kirk is worth? And my answer would be like, I don't know, like a second round pick, midseason trade, a third round. Like, I don't even know, because this stuff doesn't happen very often. And part of the Sam Bradford trade that went for a first was that he had another year on his contract. Kirk not having a year on his contract, it's like he can't even really be a guaranteed long-term option for someone. So I think you're talking about a middle round pick to try to acquire Kirk Cousins. So, but from the Vikings perspective, you get that. You're looking toward a higher draft pick. It all kind of works together. But it's a good question from Dean. How do you get Kirk to waive his no trade clause? I mean, the only thing would be if Kirk Cousins does not want to hang a bunch of more L's on his record, and miss the playoffs again. I don't know, but he's also going to consider other factors like moving his family or being away from his family and so forth. We saw in the Netflix documentary how important that is to him to have that time with his family. So, I think it is tough Joshua asked, with Kirk at the end of his deal, who wants to take him on this year? Purely a 1-year rental. Well, that's why the Jets are the discussion. But there's another team I could see, which is the Atlanta Falcons. And that would be weird as hell because they play the Falcons after the trade deadline, I believe. So it'd be like trade Kirk to the Falcons because Ritter is who we thought he was. Not good. He looks like a backup quarterback to me. And then you like play against Kirk when that would just be so odd. But that's a team that's ready to win. And yet they have a quarterback that's holding him back. So, and also there could be quarterback injuries. There could be all sorts of situations. I have to think that there will be in the next few weeks teams that make the phone call, especially if the Vikings are sitting there at like 2-5 at the trade deadline.
Yeah, and just looking at the Jets schedule upcoming here, I just brought it up. So they got Kansas City this coming Sunday. So that's an L. They're at Denver the following week. Now that, considering how awful the Broncos look, that could be a coin flip type of game. But then they're hosting Philadelphia after that. So even if the Jets were to go into Denver and win, you're looking at probably 2-4 for them going into their bye week, which is week 7. And then they would play sort of a I guess, neutral site game with the Giants after that out of their bye week. So it's really a question of what are the Jets going to look like when that time comes, to your point. And some of these other teams, I mean, you could see some injuries with some other teams. Atlanta is interesting because they seem to have some weapons down there that could be beneficial for Kirk Cousins, receivers and Kyle Pitts at tight end. And they seem to have enough on defense to make a little bit of an impact and keep them in games where they're not playing in constant shootouts. But yeah, I don't know, man. I mean, the other team I was kind of thinking of is, if if Sam Howell keeps looking like he looked yesterday, Kirk returning to Washington, I don't know. Maybe if they stay in the mix, I don't know. Who knows? That would be kind of ironic. But yeah, it's just really going to depend on what happens over the next few weeks, and what some of these other teams are going to look like if we see another quarterback get hurt. But even then, there's going to be so much conversation about, again, the contract. Whatever team that might be inquiring about Kirk Cousins, are they going to have the money to be able to absorb his contract? Are they going to have to send somebody back to kind of do an NBA style trade where you're kind of matching salaries or sort of offsetting money to make it work? It's going to be really, really complicated. And I just have a hard time seeing it really happen, even if the Vikings are in a position where they're ready to punt on this season.
Yeah, I think no one would ever have exercised their no trade clause faster than Kirk if they tried to trade him to Washington. The text would come back immediately. No, I don't know what his no trade clause is. Sometimes it's like a list of teams you won't go to, but I could probably guess the first on the list team. Although I don't know. Daniel Snyder's not the owner anymore, so maybe that would change the math
Different head
there.
coach now.
It's
Who knows?
Yeah, I know, right? Ron Rivera had nothing to do with what happened with Kirk before. Joshua says, "Are the Saints a possible destination?" Got to think no. They may be looking for a young quarterback. I mean, with Derek Carr hurt, they're talking about it as week to week. So, I mean, that's hard to say, but it doesn't look like they need to put him on IR and try to get a new quarterback. They're going to lose with Jameis Winston though, and it's hard for them. But again, same sort of deal. Like by the time you get Kirk there, teach him how to play offense, then I mean you're already too far gone. That's why if I had to bet, I would say no. And one before I die says, "Did you see Adam Schefter's speculation?" I did, and I thought that it came away with more of saying this makes sense than saying he's reporting anything. The reporting some sort of connection between the two teams. I just think it's going to be very soon where that happens if they lose this week, or even 1-4, that noise is going to come up, but it really will depend on this week. Kirktober also is coming, Manny, so
Yeah.
you never know about that. So anyway, there's a lot other things going on with the Vikings, but the 0-3 thing, what would you put the odds at, Manny? Because we always hear odds, we always hear it's this percentage. It's a very broad though. And I was thinking about today how there are some issues here that are clearly self-inflicted, like the whole defense. But you couldn't pick three unluckier games. And how do we balance this? I mean, the fumbles and everything else. And then, when you're talking about yesterday, Caleb Evans has the ball in his mitts and it goes through I mean, it just so if they did turn it around and they did make the playoffs, it wouldn't be that shocking because of how unlucky the losses were. So what would you put it at as an actual percentage?
Oh boy. I would say 0-3. I'd put it at maybe about 15%. I just think it's with the upcoming schedule, it's just going to be really hard, man. And even you look at late in the season, you still got Cincinnati on the schedule now. Is Joe Burrow going to be healthy by then? Will this current calf situation that he has, will that have been kind of in the rearview mirror? I don't know, because calf injuries tend to linger, as we saw with Aaron Rodgers in the past. And then, like you said, you got two of your last three games are against Detroit, who might be, the team that you're chasing to try and win this division. So it's just the schedule is really hard, man. I just have a hard time thinking that they're going to um, turn this around enough to get themselves back into the playoff conversations. And also, it's not only about like, okay, can you get to like 9 or 10 wins? It's what if you get to 9 or 10 wins and that's not enough to win the division? Now you're competing with a lot of other teams that may be in the mix for a wild card spot. I know there's an extra wild card spot now with 7 playoff teams in each conference, but it's still a tall order, man. I would say about 15% at this point.
Yeah, yeah, and when you look at the NFC too, it's either going to be Philadelphia or Dallas winning the East. The other one's gonna be in the playoffs, and then it's going to be Seattle more likely than not, just trying to eyeball it. So there's essentially one wild card spot remaining after that, and at this moment, you are 2 games behind Green Bay in trying to get there, and their team is not even healthy yet, and they've got a couple of wins on the board. I mean, so you'd essentially have to sweep Green Bay and then win every game that you're supposed to win down the stretch. It just 15, I think, is healthy. I mean, I'd probably go lower than that, even if a lot of things went right for them the rest of the way and they won all the games they were supposed to win. Nathan asked an interesting question. What's the point of going to the playoffs with this defense? I mean, if they made the playoffs, that would mean that the defense was a lot better than it was. Because if they continue to play defense this way, you aren't making the playoffs. But to your point, I don't believe it is possible in the NFL to compete for a Super Bowl with a defensive line that cannot pressure the quarterback. The Vikings are 26th in pressure percentage, but number 1 in blitzes, which tells you a lot about the personnel, I think. And also, I mean, after 2 out of the 3 games, we've heard the opposing team from the locker room say that they knew what was coming from the Vikings. Well, the thing is about the NFL, 90% of the time, you know what the other defense is doing. You're not totally shocked. It's only so many types of coverages or blitzes or whatever. So they're blitzing and so forth. But the idea is that if you have a great defensive line, they just disrupt all of that. So do people know what the San Francisco 49ers are playing? Absolutely they do. Nick Bosa makes that irrelevant. I mean the quarterbacks can read coverages and pre-snap and everything. Like they do this every week, but if that guy blows through his tackle, it's not going to matter. And there's just nobody who can do that for the Vikings. And to me, that's like a good point that even if they were able to turn it around, that even if you got into the playoffs, the defensive line is so weak that how can you see them going any farther than the first round? It just seems like it's going to be a repeat of last year. So it feels like you're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place a little bit, unless Carolina makes that decision for you. And I guess that's the last thing I want to ask you. And then I want to answer a few other questions and talk about some other things around the league. But what do you think? What's your early feeling? I mean, Andy Dalton's playing, which is a lot harder than facing Bryce Young, but they still don't like have a good team. I don't know. This one I can't figure out because on one hand I could say what a classic, like they go there, we think the season's over, they blow them out and everyone's like it's back on baby, or kind of like when they went to the Giants in 2019 after having that miserable game against Chicago. But I could also see like what a Vikingsy loss to feel like this is the one where we get back on track and then oh no it's not. You just got totally upset by a pretty bad team. I can't figure out how Vikingsy this is going to be.
Yeah, it's always kind of weird when Andy Dalton is in play, right? I mean, you go back to the 20 again, I go back to 2020 when, Andy Dalton was that quarterback for the Cowboys, and that was a bad Cowboys team. And, and the Vikings weren't great that year either, but you know, it was a game that the Vikings should have had, and they just kicked down the drain. And it was Andy Dalton just making enough plays, enough throws to win that game for Dallas. So it's always weird with him. Adam Thielen being a bit of a storyline too. Playing his former team, and Adam had a pretty productive game yesterday too. In the loss to Seattle, I think he had 11 catches, over 140 yards, something like that. So, you know, Andy Dalton being a capable quarterback that at the very least just knows how to play. Bryce Young is just a guy that's still learning, and who knows how good he's going to be, if he's going to be able to hold up, if he's going to get the concepts of the NFL game. It's boy, I don't know. It's a hard one to call. It's a hard one to predict. It's a road game. The Vikings always tend to struggle on the road, even against bad teams. I think they'll get it done. I did say that about yesterday's game too, though. So I don't know. I do think they'll get it done. Carolina's not very good overall. And I think the Vikings will find a way, just because there's so much talk about, okay, if they lose this game, this thing is really like over. I think with that kind of lingering over their head, so much scrutiny about the ending to yesterday's game as well. I think they'll find a way to scrap out a win. I have a feeling it'll be ugly though.
So I haven't decided yet where I want to go with this. I want to kind of see, injury reports and how like it. Are they talking about Dalton Reisner playing, or is he going to need several weeks to play because they needed him yesterday? But anyway, I there's a part of me that really wants to pick Carolina because they have the one thing that the Vikings struggle with, and that is defensive linemen.
Yeah.
And always and forever, the strip sack, they have dudes. I mean, Brian Burns, Derek Brown, these are highly drafted players. I think their defense is pretty legit. And they also have that defensive coordinator the Vikings weren't able to hire. So you just think a little bit of and Thielen revenge game karma. I don't know. I feel the Vikings are a better team, but the karma element of it, I don't know. I'm not sure I could pick them on grass, on the road. They've kind of had troubles with that in the past. I'm not really sure.
Although it's turf in Carolina now, isn't it? Isn't it turf at
Oh,
that
did they
stadium
change
now?
it to turf?
I think it's turf now. I think it's that synthetic turf
Oh,
now.
well, that changes everything. That changes the whole thing. Just forget it, what I just said, everybody. Joshua said, here's the question. When folks talk about our talented roster, is it really, or do we have a few talented players? No, it's not that talented of a roster. I mean, when you look at Philadelphia, how many guys can you say are above average to great? Probably like 12. When you look at the Vikings, how many guys can you say are above average to great? I mean, we can name them. Darisaw, Jefferson, Kirk, O'Neal, Hunter. I mean, Harrison Smith, maybe. And I'm done.
That's it. That's it.
I mean, Ryan Wright, like he's punting his ass off this year. So I've been so impressed. Let me tell you about some pizza real quick. You want to hear about some pizza, Manny? Would that make you excited?
Love it. Let's do it.
Okay. You guys need to make Little Caesars the official pizza of the sponsor of the NFL part of your game day. Order online during their Pizza pregame 1 hour before NFL games and get ready for some football and fun. Choose your favorite Little Caesars pizza or pick the toppings you crave. Either way, you win. And speaking of winning, everyone scores with convenient delivery or their in-store pizza portal pickup. So grab some friends and enjoy a few slices during the tastiest hour before kickoff. Something else I want to talk about, it's pretty tasty, is the offense of the Miami Dolphins.
Whew.
Are you ready after a 70-point performance to start talking about comparisons to the all-time great offenses, the 1998 Vikings, the 99 greatest show on turf? Does this have the potential to be one of the most entertaining offenses in NFL history, or was it just kind of a one game crazy team got blown out and they didn't stop scoring? Like, they probably, I mean, they usually do. Teams, if they get to like 50, they usually just kind of run, but they were just keep, getting in their bag for that at the end of the game. But what do we make of a team scoring 70? Are you ready to go there?
Yeah, man, I am. I mean, it's what was the fourth time in league history that a team has scored 70 points in a game. So what we saw yesterday from the Dolphins is incredible. And I think the reason why I'm ready to say yes to that question is we saw this offense, when Tua was healthy last year, we saw this offense be very explosive with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. And they just look like, a year, Tua is a year older, a year more mature, another training camp in this system, in this offense for all of these players. They just look like a year better. And, we saw week one, they go into Los Angeles and take down the Chargers with their offense. You know what I mean? They do it offensively, and they just flat out embarrassed the Broncos yesterday. I mean, that was just I don't even know how you if there are enough words in the English language to really describe that yesterday, because that was for as awesome as it was equally as just brutal for the Broncos. It's one of the worst defensive performances I've ever seen. 726 yards. It's just you look at the speed that they play with, and I like the fact that they don't. There's not a lot of like slow developing plays in that offense. A lot of it is Tua just drops back, quick step, and that ball is out right away. It's the focus is getting the ball into the hands of your playmakers and letting them run, because everybody on that offense in the skill positions is fast as hell. Even Raheem Mostert, who's 31, 32 years old, been in the league 9, 10 years, is still fast as hell. It's amazing, man. It's fun. It is like watching a constant fast break in basketball. It is like the 7 seconds or less Phoenix Suns with Mike D'Antoni back in the mid 2000s. It's just incredible. It's a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, you know what it reminds me of too is that first year of Chip Kelly with Nick Foles, where I
Yeah.
mean Nick Foles averaged like 9 yards a pass or something absolutely nuts. It's super fun, and Mike McDaniel is showing all the creativity that got him that job and made him a Shanahan guy and everything else. And there's those two guys are playing the sport at a different level, and part of it is personnel, where they have all these guys who, as you mentioned, they have the blazing speed and they use the most out of it, yards after catch ability. And then I think Tua is maybe not getting quite the credit that he deserves because a lot of the play designs are so fun and interesting and everything else. He has to operate all of it. He also is so accurate. I think so intelligent. He has really developed into one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. I don't think it's a Jimmy G situation in San Francisco where the guy's probably okay, but he's certainly made to look way better. No, I think Tua is a legitimately good quarterback who's being made to be an elite quarterback by this system, and it's a perfect fit for him. It works to his strengths and their strengths as a team. The only thing I wonder about, Manny, is when we talk about greatest show on turf, we talk about 98 Vikings, the Randy Moss Patriots, and so forth. Those sustained those offenses over the full season to score whatever 500 plus points and all that. And I do have it in my mind a bit of different times in the NFL where we've seen teams start off crazy hot with all sorts of new ideas, motions, and this and that and the other thing. I mean, even McVay, when he came into the league, just had everybody shocked and had this incredible offense to start. But then teams started figuring out some of it, but it took a while with McVay, and then they, reinvented themselves with Matt Stafford. But I I think we also have to give NFL coaches a little bit of credit to say I'm not sure how long this type of thing can go before they start to figure out answers. It's just that they have the personnel to go with it. And that's what's always unstoppable, right? Like if you have Randy Moss on your team, that's what's unstoppable. If you have Isaac Bruce, Torrey Holt, Marshall Falk, great offensive line, Orlando Pace, that's what's unstoppable usually. So I think they do have that. I don't think that the NFL is just going to snap their fingers and figure out like, oh, all you have to do is X, Y, and Z, like happened to like Colin Kaepernick or something in San Francisco after that first year, or, whatever other teams have kind of had an innovation. Chip Kelly, I mentioned. I think this could keep going.
I do too, and I think a big test for them is going to come this weekend when they're at Buffalo. The Bills have a pretty good defense. That's a crazy environment to play in. The Bills are a good team. The Bills are a team that has a lot of talent on offense themselves, and an elite level quarterback tends to turn the ball over a little bit, but Josh Allen is still one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. You talked about it. The Bills kind of feel like they've found their groove again after that week 1 loss to the Jets. That's going to be a big test for the Dolphins, and it'll be the one to watch. I think this year this weekend, I should say, to see if they can really kind of pick it up, because they've looked great. You went into Los Angeles and you took down the Chargers, went toe to toe with them. You went into New England and you didn't have a great offensive day. But you found a way to make enough plays to get that win against a pretty good defensive team in New England. So, and then you demolished Denver yesterday. You go on the road and you hang a big number on the Buffalo Bills. That's going to say a lot, man. That's going to say a lot for an offense that already looks really incredible.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Sean McDermott's one of the best defensive coaches in the league, and
Yep.
that'll be a really, really good test, and also could be just a phenomenal football game. So I'm excited about that one. Just to answer a few comments here, Delton says, I don't think it's about wins, talking about the potential for a Kirk trade. I think it's about keeping chemistry. Management doesn't want to lose the team. Do you think getting rid of him would improve morale for the team? I mean, of course, it's not going to improve morale for the team to trade away your starting quarterback. But I if you're a horrible team, I'm not that concerned about morale. I mean, because go back and look at Zach Taylor in his first year before they got Joe Burrow, and how people were talking about how he didn't know what he was doing as a coach, and the chemistry wasn't good and the culture wasn't good. He gets Joe Burrow, whoops, they're in the Super Bowl and now he's a genius coach. I mean, it morale and locker room and all that stuff, chemistry is a year to year thing. I mean, last year couldn't have been better for this team, but also that went along with lots of winning. And then this year, I don't know. I don't see it. I mean, but they're 0-3, so why would you see it? Right? I mean, if you're 0-4, 1-5, 2-6, whatever it is, no matter who your quarterback is, your morale is terrible, your locker room is garbage. It's always in forever. No 4-12 team in NFL history ever liked each other. There's no chance, right? So I think it doesn't really matter. But I do think that maybe there is a chance that the ownership does not want to hang that number up on the board for their career, or they don't want to show up to the stadium and watch Jaron Hall try to play against, I don't know, Atlanta or something. Well, New Orleans. New Orleans defense probably destroy Jaron Hall if he was playing. So yeah, maybe you don't want to see that. Maybe you don't want to make Justin Jefferson upset by getting rid of Kirk Cousins. I don't know. But when you get to a certain point, it's just over, and there's not much that you can really do. So you kind of have to just take what you can get for whoever. Lee says, what's the percentage chance Danielle Hunter is a Viking in 2024? Depleting by the day, wouldn't you say, Manny?
Yeah, feels like it. I mean, it's all going to depend on, what kind of new contract you want to give him. If he wants to stay and play for the kind of contract that you want to give him, what's the status of the team going to be after the season? Provided that they don't trade him before the trade deadline this season, if they're out of it. Yeah, I honestly right now I have a tough time seeing him being on the team next year, just because when you look at where he's at in his career, if the Vikings are at a point where they want to transition and sort of do sort of a soft rebuild, not a complete, demolition of the roster. But obviously you'd be moving on from Kirk Cousins. You would have a new quarterback next year. Next year would probably be kind of a transition year where you're grooming that young quarterback. You probably have like a veteran guy to start a few games, at least a handful of games at the start of the year next year. So you'd probably be looking at, at most probably a 7-win team next year if you decide to move on. Does Danielle Hunter want to be a part of that again after you just had another season, in 2023 where you probably only won 6 or 7 games? I have a hard time believing that would be the case.
James says, "Do you think if the offense stopped turning the ball over, it could help our defense?" Oh yeah, I mean the thing is that the Vikings offense has only scored on 33% of their drives. Good is somewhere toward like 45%, and that's 18th in the league, and a big part of that is turnovers. I mean that if you can sustain drives, if you're not giving the extra possessions, all those things, yeah, it's a huge deal. And I think eventually they will stop turning the ball over. It's just when too little, too late. So yeah, I mean, of course that's a problem, but you're also saying like they only turned the ball over twice yesterday, and that's a pretty normal number of turnovers in a game. One or two, one's a bounce tipped at the end zone. It's like you can't ask them to be perfect and just completely stop turning the ball over. Your defense has to bail you out at some point. Mike says, let's pay JJ 35 mil a year and be in cap hell again. That would be not understanding how the cap works, really, because even if someone is paid $30 million a year, that doesn't mean their cap hit is $30 million every year, unless it's a franchise tag. They can design the contract to have lower numbers earlier in the part of the contract in the first couple of years. The other point is that if you have a quarterback on a rookie contract, that's going to even things out where you can pay other players. And Justin Jefferson is absolutely worth whatever dollar amount he's going to make. So, we've got Hawkinson deal was stupid. He isn't worth the money. He did have a bad day yesterday, Daniel, from dropping the ball in the end zone to the fumble. But I think when we're just talking about cap numbers, his cap numbers are very reasonable for 3 years of the deal. He's one of the better tight ends in the league. I mean, what you're trying to do, Manny, is you're trying to set up the next quarterback with the best possible situation he can have. And I think that they've done that extremely well so far. It's just that they do not have a complete football team. And when you watch the Eagles, you watch the 49ers, it's like you see so much more overall talent, which is the whole goal of rebuilding a team. And you wouldn't call the rebuild if they were expected to just win every game and they had a complete team. We wouldn't call it that. We'd be talking about Super Bowl or bust.
You have the best wide receiver in football. You have one of the best tight ends in the game. You have one of the best left tackles in football. You have a really good right tackle. If you plug in a young quarterback, that's a lot to work with. That's a lot to work with. It's not a complete offense. You still have some issues on the interior of the offensive line that could be problematic. But if you have a young, athletic, mobile quarterback that can maybe avoid some of the sacks that the current quarterback can't avoid, or avoid some of the pressures that Kirk Cousins can't avoid, it kind of minimizes the impact of not having the best interior on the offensive line. Defensively, they need to improve upon. Obviously, there's a lot of work to go, a lot of work to be done there. But I think as far as setting up a young quarterback, you've got good pieces there to work with. And because he's a young quarterback on a rookie deal, you have the flexibility to be able to go out and make moves to improve in some of the other areas and make your roster as good as possible as you're developing that young quarterback over the course of a 3 or 4 or 5 year period. So that I don't. I mean, I think T.J. Hawkinson's fine. Yesterday wasn't his finest moment. That losing that fumble on that first drive when the offense was humming and getting themselves in scoring position was such a gut punch, just a deflator. And then the play at the end too just was not helpful. But I mean, T.J. Hawkinson's fine. He's good. You throw it to him most of the time, he's going to catch the ball. He can get downfield a little bit. I mean, what's the alternative? You don't have him, and you're relying on Josh Oliver and Johnny Munt. Like, that's no disrespect to those guys, but T.J. Hawkinson's better than both of those guys. So, you can't you can't say no to talent. And when you have talent at a position who's young, I mean, it's not like T.J. Hawkinson's 34 years old. So I think his contract is fine. I think overall it just comes down to finding that young quarterback and surrounding him with as much talent as possible.
And that relates to the next comment from Marley. Time to have a serious conversation about Quasi. Competitive rebuild is a paradox. 22 draft was an all-time worst. Not signing Jefferson before the season. Is Quasi overplaying his hand? He won't resign. So the last part of it, I don't agree with. Justin Jefferson would have to fight 2 more years through 2 franchise tags. Actually, wait, make that 3 more years because next year is his 5th-year option. So 5th-year option, franchise tag, and he could make a lot of noise if he wanted to, but ultimately he is under contract with the Minnesota Vikings for at least the next 3 years. That is a lot to try to hold out in training camp all the way through. So I think that he will, but the price probably goes up. So I can agree with the first part, overplaying the hand, not getting him signed. I think that's a mistake, but I still think that it's in his best interest to sign an extension, and how they work that out, I guess we'll have to find out next year. As far as the competitive rebuild, I also agree that it is a paradox. I think that was the hand he was dealt from the start. We've talked about the 2022 draft ad nauseum, and I think that there's been a lot of good players to work with in the 2023 draft. I've liked what I've seen from Mekhi Blackman, Ivan Pace they got, who's been a good starter for them. Addison looks like he's going to be a good player for a long time. I think that your serious conversation about Kwesi Adofo-Mensah cannot happen right now because we don't have enough information. We have a bunch of sort of hints and ideas. We have a bigger picture and a micro picture. I mean, if you want to look under a microscope and go, hey, Manny, I think I see the 2022 draft down there. Not good. Okay, that's fine. But in the bigger picture, Kirk Cousins is not the quarterback long term. They're doing the thing in rebuilding the roster without putting a lot of money into the quarterback position that has worked so many times around the league. And so I think that, the mistakes in the draft, every team's going to do that. This is an all-timer. Yeah, you're right about that. It certainly is so far. But I don't think that until we see the bigger picture start to come to fruition, and that begins with drafting a quarterback next year, and then how they rebuild the trenches is a huge deal. I mean, you guys come on here every night and you talk about the trenches. You're absolutely right. You can't, but also, did you want to keep Za'Darius Smith and Delvin Tomlinson for what reason, right? So it was probably better not to overpay Delvin Tomlinson. Probably not better to give a huge raise to Za'Darius Smith. Like what would have been a better plan there? So I just think, and you can tell me if you disagree, I just think that we need a lot more time. And going 0-3, I think it messes with people's brains. Like,
Yeah.
we knew this was not going to be a great Super Bowl season. And so right now, if you had to predict, you'd probably say they went 8-9. But if it hadn't been 0-3 and it had been 1 win and 1 loss all season long, you'd be like, oh, competitive rebuild. But you start 0-3 and now you want to throw the general manager over the side of the boat. Like, that's my point. That's my point yesterday when I kind of went off in the post game. It's like, this was the direction we all agreed upon was the right way to go. They lose a couple games. It doesn't look very good, as we kind of expected it would, with a bunch of holes on the roster. And now you've decided the guy can't do his job. It's like the bigger picture, the forest, not the trees, makes a lot of sense. But if you go move to move, I think you can find a lot that's gone wrong here. So there you
Yeah.
have it. That's how I feel.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is also kind of the trouble with again, it always goes back to Kirk Cousins, right? This is kind of the this is what makes it so complicated with Kirk Cousins being your quarterback, because he's a veteran guy, has been in the league for a decade plus. He's a good quarterback. The mindset when you have him at this stage of his career, the mindset is that you're gonna, you're supposed to try and win. And but this team is not built to win a championship right now. That they're just not. And to your point, we knew this going in. We knew this team at even at 13 wins last year, it was kind of a fraudulent 13 wins. I mean, what they did last year, I keep saying it week after week, what they did last year will never be done again. It's almost impossible for it to happen again. And so that, last year was a 13-win team that was probably actually more like a 9, maybe a 10-win team at best. If, the world was normal for them last year. And now you're seeing this year with a defense that doesn't even have as much talent as it did last year. And it was a bad defense last year, mostly because of Ed Donatel's scheme. But they just don't have as many good players on the defense this year as they did last year. And so now you couple that with, the world kind of balancing out for them now. They're not winning games the same way that they did. They're in every game. They've been in every game these first 3 weeks, but they're not getting the big catch from Justin Jefferson that they got last year in Buffalo. They're not getting the touchdown to KJ Osborne against the Lions that they got last year. You know what I mean? They're not getting the same type of big plays that sort of flip a 50-50 game that they got a year ago. And this is kind of where they are and where they're at. And it's hard to really judge how this GM is doing until they find that quarterback and you get them going in the right direction, which is something that we've been clamoring for this team to do for the last 3 years, basically. And I think they're finally going to do it now. You just have to kind of just tough it out for this season and just see how things turn out. You can kind of learn about some of the young players that you have and who's going to turn into somebody who can help you long term. And then you move on from the quarterback and you go in a different direction. And that's, I think, at that point is when you learn more about this GM, learn more about this head coach, and figure out if they're the right guys in place.
And Marley says Kwesi pushed money into future years, which we all eviscerated Rick for, but those players were actually good. Pushing dead cap for Davenport and Dean Lowry is a boneheaded move. And you are correct. There's no question about that. And that's what I'm talking about, is when we put on our magnifying glasses, or I guess you hold a magnifying glass. When you hold the magnifying glass up to individual moves, we can find fault with them. And I totally agree. That's not something I would have done. Also, just in general, if a player has a massive career of injuries, let's just not in the future and pretend we thought about it. Like you're just asking for it. If you sign somebody like Davenport who never plays a whole season, or Andrew Booth Jr. who's never been healthy since high school, like maybe this is a lesson to be learned. Like focus on availability being the best ability in the future. So you're right about that. But that's where I'm flip-flopping back and forth with this of like, it's not that hard to see where suddenly when you get a bunch of cap space moved out from the quarterback, you become smarter with your signings. This is how it works. The Cincinnati Bengals, like they signed Trey Hendrickson, who was a great player and had a ton of sacks and was a star for the Saints. So they sign him and he's good. Like, oh, no kidding, because he's at the top of the market. He's the best player out there. They could afford him. Well, Mahomes was still cheap. They signed Joe Thuney. What a great signing for $80 million for a guard. Shockingly, he's better than drafting a tackle and moving him there, right? Like when you get smarter when you have more money to work with, unless you're the Bears. So I think that we're going to see better moves when you can afford better players, but I don't know that that's true, and that's why I want to say give more time to see how this plays out before we make a huge judgment on the general manager. By the way, on the podcast feed only, I talked with Kevin Seifert from ESPN for a long time about this subject. And, Seifert's seen it all, done it all, is a tremendous reporter. So check that out if you want to hear his perspective also on Kwesi, because I know you guys have heard mine over the last few days. Horse Feathers asked, do you think that Justin Jefferson would be upset over trading Kirk or feel like he might have a better shot with a different quarterback? I think Justin Jefferson wants whoever is going to throw him the ball and win football games. Like, if they haven't won anything with Kirk, I mean, every time he's asked about it, by the way, he's never said, I can't live without Kirk Cousins. Every time he's been like, Kirk's my quarterback, but business is business.
Yeah, boy, the Vikings whiffing on Christian Ponder has really done a number on this fan base, hasn't it? It just feels like everybody's at this point now where the idea of moving on from Kirk Cousins, it's just all these terrifying thoughts just goes through everybody's head. It's like, well, what if you draft Christian Ponder? What if you draft the next Christian Ponder? Well, what if JJ is going to be upset? And what if you don't? Here's another thought. What if the Vikings draft like Drake May or Shedeur Sanders and they're awesome? Like what if Drake May is like legit good, like, and becomes like a great quarterback? It's hard to tell. We don't, we see so many years where we think this quarterback is going to be good and he ends up being terrible, or we're not super high on this guy and then he ends up being outstanding. If everybody had knew that, then Patrick Mahomes would have been the first quarterback taken in 2017. Although I know you were the one guy that was like, yeah, that guy's going to be pretty good. But
I've also thought other guys like Josh Rosen were going to be good and was wrong too. So
yeah, but the thing of it is it's and it goes back to the Kwesi conversation too. All of this talk about, the 2022 draft class right now does not look great. If they nail this quarterback, it's not really going to matter. If they nail this guy and he's a stud, and he's even like, if he's as good as like Justin Herbert, like, he doesn't even have to be like Patrick Mahomes. If he's Justin Herbert, if he's as good as Justin Herbert is, and then you make other moves after that, free agent signings, trades, other draft picks, you make the right moves after that, it's not really going to matter how bad the 2022 draft class is. It would be nice if some of those guys were contributing and making an impact, but it all comes down to that quarterback, man. If you nail that young quarterback, they're going to be able to, cover up a lot of weaknesses, and you make some nice moves after that, you're going to be fine. And then that's when we're really going to find out how good this general manager is. And to your point about Justin Jefferson, the quarterback they take is good and the team is winning and they're going in the right direction. Justin Jefferson is going to be fine because that's all he cares about. He doesn't care who the quarterback is. He's not going to throw a fit if they move on from Kirk Cousins. I mean, Justin Jefferson is 24 years old. Kirk Cousins is 35. I think he knows that he's not going to be able to play with Kirk Cousins forever, and I think he's okay with that.
Something popped into my mind when Jamie said this about, the 49ers wasting a bunch of draft picks for a quarterback they traded to the Cowboys, is that the Vikings could have traded Kirk for Trey Lance and they'd probably still be 0-3 right now. And then it would be feeling a lot different. So, anyway, Lee says, according to PFF, Mark Davenport was the #1 edge defender in free agency. Great edge defenders must be drafted, not signed. That's a good point. I think you could get interior defenders. There's not too many. Yeah, Trey Hendrickson maybe was the outlier there. I think that's true. But you know what? Another part of it is too, is that you can also sign players who are just helpful. So think about like what Brian Robinson was. I know it wasn't a signing, but Brian Robinson on 27 defense was really darn helpful. He was not a superstar. I mean, wasn't as good as he was when he was younger, and Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffin were there, but he was good. So like, you can add good players when you have cap space. And yes, it will be a challenge with the cap, with Darisaw and Jefferson signing, but that's where you're setting up your cap with those guys signing longer term extensions is what you're looking for. So they're not getting the $30 million hit You know what I mean? Like it's not the $30 million hit. Look at AJ Brown's huge contract. Like it was not just all 25 or whatever, 28 million. It was like 11, 13, right? And so it gets backloaded and whatever. Like there's ways to mess around with that. With Kirk, there never was. That's the problem, is that because of the way he signed and the short-term deals, there was never any way to really help it except for just renegotiating and then pushing money into dead cap and whatever else. So that's kind of always been the point, is that every year Jefferson won't have a $32 million cap hit. He might have like 16 and 20 and then 47, but whoops, they renegotiated it and now it's 22. You know what I mean? So they'll be able to work around that, I think, if they have the quarterback space. So anyhow, there was one other question I wanted to ask you, Manny, and I know you want to get back to these football games that are going on. If you're not watching it, I don't know if it's behind you or in front of you. It's behind
It
you.
is. Yeah, you can't really see my TV is kind of behind me and sort of offset to my right. So
Okay, maybe you need to put a mirror right next to you so you can see the TV, or flip the computer around, whatever you're going to do. Usually I have it on the phone, but my phone's about to die. So, what I was going to ask is two quick things. Do you think the Cowboys are frauds? Because I am almost certain that our friend Jonathan Harrison is listening or will listen back to this and wants me to mention that Mike McCarthy had a meltdown game against the Cardinals because he can't stand Mike McCarthy. And also, who do you think's making the playoffs? Like, if you had to guess today, who's your playoffs?
well, I Cowboys one is hard to answer because I think they're very good. I mean, are they frauds from the standpoint of are they going to go to the Super Bowl? I don't know, but I kind of had that feeling about them anyway. Like I thought they would be good, and I thought they would be a playoff team. But I thought going into the season that Philadelphia was better. I thought that San Francisco was better. I think we're seeing that both of those teams are better. Um, so I don't know if I really want to call the Cowboys frauds because they've been a pretty good team and they've had games like they had yesterday in the last couple of years, even though they've been a good team. So I won't really call them frauds. I do think Jonathan's hatred for Mike McCarthy is absolutely hilarious. And I think he should just stick with the bit. I get it. Stick with the bit, have some fun with it. As far as who's going to the playoffs, I think the Cowboys are going to go. I think San Francisco and Philadelphia are going to go. Depending on what happens with Tampa Bay tonight might tell me a little bit more about, if they can kind of keep this going. I picked the Saints to win the NFC South. But now with Derek Carr being banged up, who knows how that's going to hold up for them. So I'll go with Tampa Bay for right now. That's, what is that, 5 teams? Need 2 more out of the NFC.
Yep.
Detroit. I think Detroit's going to win the North. And then I'll take Seattle.
Okay, so did you throw Green Bay in there?
I did not throw Green. I don't think I threw Green Bay in there, no.
Okay, Green Bay is the hard one to figure because each game there's been like a lot of good things that Jordan Love has done. And then there's also been, oh, you're down by 17, or oh, you blew a big lead against a horrendous Atlanta team. So even though they're 2-1, I'm not totally sold, but I also think if they get completely healthy, that they're probably a more complete team than the Vikings. They're definitely a more complete team than the Vikings if they get healthy, because their defense is pretty good. And I think that Love has shown competence, and he needs his top wide receiver back in order to be a complete quarterback. But I think he's played well enough to think that they could win 9 games, and that might do it for you. I also wonder about the Rams. Like the Rams, I don't know what they're doing right now because I have not been watching this game because it's 6-6. Okay, wow.
Yeah. And
But
Tampa Bay is down by 2 touchdowns to Philadelphia too. So
yeah, Tampa. I don't think Tampa Bay is very good. I think Tampa
yeah.
Bay ends with like 6 wins. But the Rams, though, I mean, they're coached extremely well. Like, could there be 3 teams from that division? I think that's very possible. And there could be, 2 from the north and then 1 from the south. And this is where you start talking yourself into like, well, if the Rams aren't good, then maybe the Vikings can sort of sneak in there or something. But I would have Atlanta, I think, now that Derek Carr got hurt. I would have easily had New Orleans. But if Derek Carr comes back banged up too early, I mean, even Joe Burrow is struggling to play injured. It's really hard to play injury quarterback. And when it's your arm, I mean, that could be like 4 to 6 weeks, and they could lose a lot of games. And I think Atlanta's good enough in the trenches and with their running game to at least be a 9-8 team and win that division. So it's going to be interesting because I think that Dallas and Philly will both make it. I don't think Dallas is a fraud. I just think they always have that meltdown game. So Dallas, Philly, San Francisco, Seattle, Detroit, Green Bay, and Atlanta is kind of how I have it playing out. Is that 7? I think that's 7.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I got it playing out there. On the AFC side, I would just eyeballing it real quick. Miami, Buffalo, Kansas City looks like the only team from the West though. But I don't know. Like after what I saw from the Chargers yesterday, I'm still not really sold on them. They probably should have lost that game. Could it be 3 teams in the North? I think it could be, right? With
Yeah.
like Baltimore, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. Maybe Cincinnati comes from behind. I think it's going to be 3 teams there. And then I still would put my money on Jacksonville at this point. So that's kind of where I got it.
Yeah, I'm there too. The Jacksonville was weird yesterday. Jacksonville against Houston. Although shout out to CJ Stroud, man, he looked really good yesterday, and CJ Stroud seems like he's getting it together, man. I like what I'm seeing from him. And so Houston, I don't think is just from a talent standpoint, I don't think they're very good, but they could be kind of a team that makes it that they're kind of like that annoying team that beats somebody good and kind of like throws their season off into a weird sort of train wreck situation. Yeah, I mean Miami, Kansas City, obviously, Buffalo. Um, I feel like Miami and Buffalo are going to be the only teams in the East that make it. The Jets are not going to make it. I don't think New England is good enough. The Patriots don't have enough offense. And then you're probably looking at Jacksonville winning the South by default. And yeah, you're probably right. The teams that are leading, the top 3 teams in the North right now, are probably going to be the teams that get in. Cincinnati has the talent, but is Joe Burrow going to be healthy enough? Are they going to be able to, if they lose tonight, they're 0-3, and then that puts them in a really tough spot the rest of the year in probably the toughest division. So, yeah, I'm with you on that for the AFC.
Horse Feathers makes a good point, Manny, that you landed the Monday and Thursday slot. You're going to have to turn your computer around, I think, to face the TV, or we're going to have to figure a mirror to at least look into the mirror. You get the backwards version, so you think Tampa Bay's winning right now.
Well,
that's not how it works.
Well, as if people know me well enough, they know that I'm anti Thursday night football anyway, so I don't mind missing Thursday night football. That's why I was kind of glad to be able to do this on Thursday nights with you. So I don't mind missing Thursday night football because I hate Thursday night football anyway. I think it's bad for the players.
Well, thank you for all your time, Manny, and thank you all for your participation during football. And I hope that this works for you all on Monday and Thursdays when Manny and I do the show. If you don't hate Thursday night football like Manny, turn on the TV, put the YouTube on, listen to us, watch the game. It gives you the best of both worlds. But I appreciate all of you tuning in to have this fun conversation with us, and we will carry on. We're not 0-3. We've won every day. So we'll continue doing what we do. Thanks for your time, Manny. And thank you all for watching /listening. And we'll catch you later. Football.